The iron sizzled against Marigold Parker's skin as she screamed, the smell of her own burning flesh filling her nostrils on that brutal summer day of 1878. Through tears that blurred the New Mexico sky, she watched her husband's cruel smile as he pressed the brand deeper. A crude diamond shape with his initials inside it, marking her as his property as surely as he marked his cattle. "There," Silas Parker said, pulling away the hot iron and admiring his handiwork on her shoulder blade. "Now everyone will know who you belong to, wife." Marigold bit back a sob, knowing that crying would only make the beating worse. 3 years of marriage to the wealthiest cattle baron in the territory had taught her that lesson well. She'd been 17 when her father had sold her into this marriage, securing her future, he'd called it. Now, at 20, she felt decades older, her spirit nearly as scarred as her body was becoming. "Get yourself cleaned up," Silas said, tossing the brand aside where it hissed in the dirt. "The McAllisters are coming for dinner, and I won't have you embarrassing me." She nodded silently, pulling her torn dress over her shoulder, wincing as the rough fabric scraped against the fresh burn. This was the final humiliation, being marked like an animal. As Silas strode back toward their grand house on the hill overlooking Tascosa, Marigold knew she couldn't endure another day of this life. The small town of Tascosa had sprung up along the Canadian River, growing from a trading post to a bustling settlement as cattle drives and railroad interests transformed the Texas Panhandle. Silas Parker owned half the grazing land in the county and most of the businesses in town. His word was law, his cruelty whispered about but never challenged. That night, after serving dinner to her husband and his business associates, with a placid smile that hid the pain radiating from her shoulder, Marigold made her decision. She waited until Silas fell into his usual drunken sleep before slipping from their bed. Moving silently through the dark house, she gathered the few possessions that mattered: a locket with her mother's picture, a small bundle of clothing, and $78 she'd secretly saved from household money over the years. The stable was dark and quiet when she entered, making straight for Penny, her chestnut mare. The horse nickered softly in recognition as Marigold quickly saddled her. "Quiet. Girl," she whispered, her hands trembling as she worked. "We're leaving this place forever." The night air was cool against her face as she rode away from the Parker ranch, her shoulder throbbing beneath her dress. She had no real plan beyond putting as many miles as possible between herself and Tascosa before Silas woke to find her gone. The vast emptiness of the plains stretched before her, terrifying in its immensity, yet promising freedom. She rode hard through the night, guided only by starlight and her desperate need to escape. By dawn, her body ached, the brand on her shoulder a fiery reminder of what she was fleeing. Still, she pressed on, stopping only briefly to rest Penny and drink from her canteen. She avoided the main trails, keeping instead to the wilder country where Silas's men would be less likely to search. It was on the second day, as the sun climbed high in the sky, that exhaustion finally overtook her. Spotting a small creek lined with cottonwoods, Marigold guided Penny toward the blessed shade. Her head swam with fatigue and hunger as she dismounted, nearly collapsing as her feet touched the ground. The sound of approaching hoofbeats sent a shock of terror through her weary body. She frantically looked for somewhere to hide, but the open landscape offered little cover. Before she could remount, a rider appeared from around a bend in the creek, a tall man on a dappled gray horse. "Madam?" His voice carried across the distance between them, a deep baritone touched with concern. "You all right?" Marigold froze, one hand on Penny's saddle, the other clutching the small knife she kept in her pocket. The stranger rode closer, and she could see him clearly now, tall and lean, with broad shoulders and sun-bronzed skin. His features were strong beneath the shadow of his wide-brimmed hat, his eyes a startling blue against his weathered face. "I'm fine," she said stiffly, though she knew she must look a fright or dress dusty, her hair falling from its pins, dark circles under her eyes. "Pardon my saying so, but you don't look fine." He dismounted with an easy grace, keeping a respectful distance. "Name's Flint O'Brien. I'm riding for the Circle M Ranch about 10 miles east of here." She didn't answer, eyeing the man warily. He wasn't wearing a gun belt, which was unusual, but that didn't mean he wasn't dangerous. "You're a long way from anywhere," he continued, his tone gentle. "And if you don't mind my observation, you look like you've been riding hard." "I'm just passing through," Marigold said, wincing as a wave of dizziness swept over her. She swayed slightly, and before she could stop herself, she was falling. Strong arms caught her before she hit the ground. The world spun as Flint lowered her carefully to sit beneath a cottonwood tree. "Here," he said, offering his canteen. "Fresh water. You're dehydrated." Too weak to protest, she accepted the water, drinking gratefully. Up close, she could see the concern in his eyes wasn't feigned. "Thank you," she murmured. "You running from something, madam?" he asked quietly. The directness of the question startled her. "What makes you say that?" "Been working cattle most my life. Can tell the difference between someone traveling somewhere and someone running away." His eyes met hers steadily. "And with respect, you've got the look of someone who's afraid of being caught." Marigold looked away, unsure how to respond. This stranger was perceptive, but could she trust him? "I don't mean to pry," he continued, settling down a few feet away. "But if you're in trouble, maybe I can help. The Circle M is a decent place. Mrs. Miller, who owns it, is a fair woman. If you need somewhere to rest up, I'm sure she'd take you in for a spell." "Why would you help me?" Marigold asked. "You don't know me," Flint shrugged, his expression open. "Out here, folks help each other. It's how we survive." He paused, then added, "And I've seen enough of this world to know when someone needs a hand." There was something in his manner, a quiet dignity, an absence of the entitlement she'd come to expect from men that made her consider his offer. "I am heading away from Tascosa," she admitted cautiously. "I can't go back there." Understanding flickered in his eyes. "The Circle M is over the territorial line into Colorado. Might be far enough." As they talked, her sleeve had slipped, revealing the edge of her bandage, now soaked through with blood and fluid from the burn. Flint's eyes widened slightly. "You're hurt," he said. "Let me see." "It's nothing," she said quickly, tugging her sleeve back into place. "That's not nothing. That's a fresh wound. And from the looks of it, it needs tending." His voice was firm but kind. "I've patched up enough injuries on the trail. If you'll allow me, I can help." Marigold hesitated, then slowly nodded. She turned slightly and pulled the fabric away from her shoulder, revealing the soiled bandage. Flint's face darkened as he gently peeled back the cloth. The moment he saw the brand, still raw and angry, his jaw clenched tight. "Who did this to you?" he asked, his voice low with controlled anger. She couldn't bring herself to answer, shame burning her cheeks. "Your husband," he guessed, and her silence confirmed it. Flint drew a deep breath, then reached for his saddlebag. "I've got some salve that'll help with the healing. It won't take away the mark, but it'll ease the pain and prevent infection." As he worked, his touch was gentle, his movements precise. He cleaned the wound with water from his canteen, then applied a greenish salve that cooled the burning sensation almost immediately. "My mother was a healer," he explained as he worked, "taught me about plants and such before she passed. This is comfrey and yarrow mixed with beeswax." When he'd finished bandaging her shoulder with a clean cloth, Marigold felt tears welling in her eyes, not from pain, but from the simple kindness of his actions. "Thank you," she whispered. Flint nodded, packing away his supplies. "You need food and rest. Like I said, the Circle M isn't far. Mrs. Miller lost her husband last year. She's been hiring hands to keep the ranch going, but she could use help around the house, too. Might be a good place for you to catch your breath and decide what comes next." Marigold considered his words. She had nowhere else to go, no plan beyond fleeing. And if Silas's men caught up with her... "All right," she said finally. "I'll go with you to the Circle M." Flint smiled, and for the first time in years, Marigold felt a flicker of hope. The ride to the Circle M took several hours. Flint led the way, occasionally glancing back to check on Marigold, but otherwise giving her the space and silence she clearly needed. As they rode, the landscape began to change. the flat plains giving way to rolling hills with stands of pine trees. "We're in Colorado now," Flint informed her as they crossed a shallow stream. "Circle M land starts just beyond that ridge." The ranch came into view as they crested the hill, a modest spread with a 2-story farmhouse, a large barn, and several outbuildings. Cattle grazed in fenced pastures, and in the distance a couple of riders moved slowly among the herd. "It's not as grand as some," Flint said, "but it's a good place with good people." As they approached the house, a woman emerged onto the porch, tall and sturdy, with silver-streaked dark hair pulled back in a practical bun. She wore a simple work dress and a curious expression as she watched them ride up. "Flint O'Brien, I wasn't expecting you back till tomorrow," she called out, her eyes moving to Marigold. "And you've brought company." "Mrs. Miller, this is Miss—" Flint paused, realizing he'd never asked Marigold's name. "Marigold," she supplied, intentionally omitting her last name. "Just Marigold for now," Flint said, understanding in his eyes. "She's in need of a safe place to rest. I thought of the Circle M." Mrs. Miller studied Marigold for a long moment, taking in her exhausted state, the way she held herself to protect her injured shoulder, the fear still lingering in her eyes. "Well, you thought right," the older woman said finally. "Come inside, both of you. Looks like you could use some hot food and coffee." Flint helped Marigold dismount, steadying her when her legs threatened to give way beneath her. Mrs. Miller's sharp eyes missed nothing. "Flint, see to the horses, then come in. I'll get our guests settled." Inside, the farmhouse was simple but comfortable, polished wood floors, sturdy furniture, and windows that let in plenty of light. Mrs. Miller led Marigold to a chair at the kitchen table and put a kettle on the stove. "Now," she said, turning to face Marigold directly, "I don't need to know everything, but I should know if there's trouble following you." Marigold hesitated, then nodded. "My husband. He'll be looking for me. He's a powerful man in Tascosa." "Tascosa," Mrs. Miller repeated thoughtfully. "That would be Silas Parker's territory, wouldn't it?" Marigold's face must have shown her shock, because Mrs. Miller's expression softened. "News travels, even out here. Silas Parker's reputation precedes him." She glanced at Marigold's shoulder. "Is that his work?" "Yes," Marigold whispered. The older woman's face hardened momentarily, then she nodded decisively. "You'll stay here as long as you need to. I could use help with the house and garden anyway. Been too busy with ranch business since Henry passed." "I don't want to bring trouble to your door," Marigold protested. "Trouble finds its way regardless," Mrs. Miller said pragmatically. "At least this kind is for a good cause." She poured hot water into a teapot. "The bedroom at the top of the stairs to the right is yours for now. There's a washroom off the kitchen where you can clean up. I'll find you some clean clothes." Flint entered the kitchen as Mrs. Miller was setting out cups for tea. He'd removed his hat, revealing thick brown hair that curled slightly at his neck. "Horses are taken care of," he reported. "Gave them both extra feed. They've had a long couple of days." "Good," Mrs. Miller said. "Marigold will be staying with us for a while. I was just telling her about the room upstairs." Flint nodded, his eyes meeting Marigold's briefly. "It's settled then. You'll be safe here." "Thank you," Marigold said, looking between them, overwhelmed by their kindness to a stranger. "I don't know how I'll repay you." "We'll worry about that later," Mrs. Miller said firmly. "For now, you need rest and healing." After a simple but hearty meal of bean soup and fresh bread, Marigold bathed in the washroom, wincing as she gently cleaned around her brand. The salve Flint had applied had indeed eased the pain considerably, but the mark itself was a stark reminder of what she'd escaped. In the small bedroom upstairs, she found clean clothes laid out on the bed, a simple cotton dress, undergarments, and a woolen shawl. They were slightly too large, but wonderfully clean. For the first time in days, she felt almost human again as she crawled between the crisp sheets. Despite her exhaustion, sleep was elusive. Every time she drifted off, she jerked awake, certain she'd heard Silas's voice or the sound of horses approaching. It was near dawn when she finally fell into a deep, dreamless sleep. The next few days passed in a haze of rest and recovery. Mrs. Miller, call me Eleanor, dear, was a practical, no-nonsense woman who gave Marigold space while making sure she ate properly and rested. Flint came and went, tending to his duties as foreman of the ranch, but he always found a moment to check on her, bringing fresh salve for her wound and occasionally wildflowers to brighten up your room. A week after her arrival, Marigold felt strong enough to help with household chores. She insisted on earning her keep, despite Eleanor's protests that she should rest longer. "I've been idle long enough," Marigold said firmly, "and work will keep my mind occupied." She threw herself into cooking, cleaning, and gardening with a fervor born of both gratitude and the need to stay busy. When her shoulder allowed, she even helped with mending and laundry. The physical labor was a welcome distraction from her fears and memories. It was while hanging laundry one clear morning that she spotted Flint riding in from the east pasture. He'd been gone for 2 days, checking on a distant part of the ranch. She found herself smiling at the sight of him, then quickly looked away, confused by her reaction. "Morning," he called, dismounting near the clothesline. "Looks like you're settling in." "Yes," she replied, pinning a sheet to the line. "Everyone's been very kind." He rubbed his jaw, which showed a few days' worth of stubble. "I rode by Barton's trading post yesterday. Heard some news you should know." Marigold's hands froze on the laundry. "What news?" "There are men asking questions in the area, looking for a woman with red gold hair, riding a chestnut mare." His blue eyes were serious. "They're saying she stole valuable property and ran off." "Stole property?" Marigold repeated incredulously. "I took nothing but my own horse and the money I'd saved myself." "I believe you," Flint said, "but they're offering a reward for information. $50 is a lot of money to some folks around here." Fear clutched at her heart. "How far away are they?" "Last seen in Cimarron, about 30 miles south, but they're working their way north." He stepped closer, lowering his voice though there was no one else around. "We should change your appearance just to be safe, and maybe keep you close to the house for a while." That afternoon, Eleanor trimmed Marigold's long red gold hair to just below her ears and showed her how to darken it with walnut hull stain. The woman in the small mirror looked like a stranger, her shortened hair a deep auburn instead of its natural bright color, her once pale face now tanned from days working in the garden. "There," Eleanor said, studying the transformation with satisfaction. "If anyone comes asking, you're my niece Margaret from Denver, come to help after my husband passed." The precaution proved wise. 3 days later, 2 rough-looking men rode into the Circle M yard while Eleanor and Marigold were preparing dinner. From the kitchen window, Marigold recognized one of them, Troy Simmons, one of Silas's ranch hands, a man known for his mean streak and unwavering loyalty to her husband. "Stay inside," Eleanor instructed, wiping her hands on her apron. "Let me handle this." Marigold retreated to the pantry, but left the door cracked open so she could hear. Her heart hammered in her chest as Eleanor went out to greet the visitors. "Afternoon, gentlemen. What can I do for you?" "Madam," came a gruff voice, "we're looking for a woman, runaway wife of a prominent rancher over in Tascosa. Thought you might have seen her pass through." "A runaway, you say?" Eleanor's voice revealed nothing. "Can't say I've noticed any strangers. What does she look like?" "Pretty thing. Reddish gold hair, green eyes, riding a chestnut mare with a white blaze. Might be injured." "Haven't seen anyone matching that description," Eleanor said firmly. "Just me and my niece and the ranch hands here for the past few weeks." "Mind if we take a look around?" the second man asked, his tone suggesting it wasn't really a question. "Actually, I do mind," Eleanor replied, her voice taking on a steely quality. "This is private property, and I'm a busy woman. If I see your runaway, I'll be sure to send word to the sheriff in Cimarron." There was a tense silence, then the sound of horses shifting restlessly. "There's a reward," Troy said. $50 for information. $100 if we recover Mr. Parker's property." "Property?" Eleanor's voice was cold. "You're talking about a woman like she's a cow that wandered off." That's between her and her husband, madam, the second man said. Just doing our job. Well, I've told you what I know, which is nothing. Good day, gentlemen. Marigold heard the sounds of the men reluctantly departing, and only when hoofbeats faded in the distance did she emerge from the pantry, trembling. They'll be back, she whispered. Eleanor nodded grimly. Probably. But we'll be ready. When Flint returned from working the north pasture that evening, Eleanor informed him about the visitors. His face darkened with anger. We should move Marigold somewhere safer, he suggested. Maybe into town or further north. And have her running forever? Eleanor shook her head. No, this has to be resolved. That man can't own her. He doesn't, Flint said firmly, his eyes meeting Marigold's across the table. No matter what mark he put on you, you belong only to yourself. Something in the way he said it with such conviction, such certainty, brought tears to Marigold's eyes. Silas doesn't see it that way, she said quietly. In his mind, our marriage vows, and that brand make me his property. And the law, she faltered. The law is on his side. Not if he's hurting you, Flint argued. No man has the right to treat another human being that way. Maybe not the right, Eleanor said pragmatically, but often the power. And from what I've heard about Silas Parker, he has plenty of that in Tascosa. They fell silent, the gravity of the situation weighing heavily on them all. Finally, Flint spoke again. What if we could prove he's dangerous, get testimony from others he's hurt? There must be more victims. And who would listen? Marigold asked bitterly. The sheriff is on his payroll, the judge too, most likely. Then we go higher, Flint suggested, to the territorial governor or a federal marshal. That would take time, Eleanor pointed out. Time we may not have if his men are closing in. Marigold looked between them, these people who had taken her in, who were risking themselves for her safety. A wave of determination washed over her. I can't keep running, she said firmly. And I won't put you both in danger any longer. There's only one way to end this. What are you thinking? Flint asked, concern etched on his face. I need to face Silas, on my terms, not his. She took a deep breath. I need to get proof of what he's done, not just to me but to others. Enough evidence that even his money can't bury it. Eleanor and Flint exchanged worried glances. That's too dangerous, Flint protested. If he gets his hands on you again. I'm not suggesting I walk back into his house, Marigold clarified. But I know things about his business dealings, illegal things I overheard when he thought I wasn't listening. If I could get proof. What kind of proof? Eleanor asked. Silas has been running guns to renegade Apache bands, stirring up trouble so the army will be called in to clear natives off lands he wants for grazing. Marigold's voice was steady now. He's also been rustling cattle from smaller ranches and changing the brands. I know where he keeps his records. He's meticulous about his crimes, keeps a separate ledger in his study. Flint leaned forward, interested despite his concern. That's federal offenses. If we could get those ledgers. It's too risky, Eleanor insisted. Those men who came looking for you would kill to protect their boss. Not if we're smart about it, Marigold said. I know the ranch, I know Silas's routine, and most importantly, I know when he'll be away. She explained that every month, Silas traveled to Santa Fe for 3 days to meet with his business associates and enjoy the company of his mistress, a fact he didn't bother hiding from Marigold. He left yesterday according to the usual schedule. He won't be back until Friday. That gives us 3 days to get into the house, find the evidence, and get out. Flint rubbed his jaw thoughtfully. Even with Parker gone, there'll be ranch hands around. Not many at the house itself, Marigold countered. Most stay in the bunkhouse near the corrals, a quarter-mile away. There's usually only one man who keeps watch at night, and I know which window into Silas's study doesn't latch properly. Eleanor shook her head in amazement. You've been planning this all along, haven't you? I've had a lot of time to think these past weeks, Marigold admitted. I can't keep hiding. Sooner or later he'll find me, if not here, then somewhere else. I need to end this for good. You shouldn't go alone, Flint said firmly. I'll go with her, Eleanor suggested, but Marigold shook her head. You need to stay here. Keep the ranch running normally so no one gets suspicious. She turned to Flint. But I would welcome your help if you're willing. His blue eyes met hers steadily. You couldn't keep me away. They spent the evening planning, poring over a rough map Marigold drew of the Parker Ranch. By the time they retired for the night, they had a solid strategy. They would leave before dawn, taking a circuitous route to approach the ranch from the east, where the terrain provided more cover. They would observe the property throughout the day, then make their move after nightfall, when most of the hands would be in the bunkhouse. As Marigold lay in bed that night, anxiety and determination warred within her. The thought of returning to Tascosa, of being anywhere near the place where she'd suffered so much, filled her with dread. But the possibility of freedom, true freedom, not just running and hiding, gave her courage. A soft knock at her door interrupted her thoughts. She sat up, wrapping her shawl around her shoulders. Yes? The door opened slightly, and Flint stood in the hallway, still fully dressed. Sorry to disturb you. I was wondering if we could talk before tomorrow. She nodded, and he entered, leaving the door ajar out of propriety. He remained standing, his hat in his hands, looking uncharacteristically nervous. What is it? She asked. I'm worried about tomorrow, he admitted. Not about the plan, it's solid enough, but about you having to go back to that place after everything you've been through. Marigold smiled faintly. I'm afraid too, but I can't live looking over my shoulder forever. Flint nodded, turning his hat in his hands. I understand that. Just know that whatever happens tomorrow, you won't face it alone. I'll be right beside you every step of the way. The sincerity in his voice touched her deeply. Over the weeks she'd known him, Flint had shown himself to be a man of integrity and compassion, so different from Silas and his cruelty. She'd found herself drawn to him, despite her best efforts to guard her heart. Why are you doing this, Flint? She asked softly. Risking yourself for someone you barely know? He was quiet for a moment, considering his words carefully. When I was 16, my sister ran away from an abusive husband. He caught her, dragged her back, and he swallowed hard. She didn't survive the beating he gave her. The local law did nothing, said a man had the right to discipline his wife as he saw fit. Marigold's heart ached for him. I'm so sorry. That's when I decided I'd never stand by and watch that happen to another woman if I could help it. His blue eyes were intense as they met hers. But with you, Marigold, it's more than that. I care about what happens to you, more than I probably should, given how short a time we've known each other. A warmth spread through Marigold's chest at his words. I care about you too, she admitted. You and Eleanor have shown me that there are still good people in this world. That's worth fighting for. Flint smiled, the tension in his shoulders easing. Then we'll fight together. He moved toward the door. Get some rest. Tomorrow will be a long day. They set out before first light, dressed in practical dark clothing that wouldn't draw attention. Eleanor pressed packages of food and canteens of water into their hands, along with a small revolver that she insisted Marigold take. I haven't fired a gun in years, Marigold protested. Let's hope you won't need to, Eleanor replied. But better to have it and not need it. They rode hard through the morning, taking a winding route through less traveled areas to avoid being seen. By midday, they had reached the outer boundaries of Parker land. Flint led them to a wooded ridge that overlooked the main house, providing a good vantage point while keeping them concealed. Through Flint's field glasses, Marigold studied the place that had been her prison for 3 years. The grand white house stood on its hill, surrounded by manicured gardens that she'd tended under Silas's critical eye. In the distance, she could see men working with cattle and smoke rising from the bunkhouse chimney. Looks quiet enough, Flint observed. Just like you said, most of the activity is away from the main house. They spent the afternoon watching the patterns of movement, noting when the ranch hands came and went, identifying the few people who entered the main house. As dusk approached, Marigold's anxiety increased, but so did her resolve. We'll wait another 2 hours, Flint decided. Let everyone settle in for the night before we make our move. When darkness had fully fallen, they made their way down the ridge, leading their horses quietly through the trees. They left the animals tethered in a small grove about a quarter-mile from the house, continuing on foot. The back of the house was dark, except for a single light in the kitchen, where Marigold knew Silas's housekeeper, Mrs. Downey, would be finishing her evening chores. They waited in the shadows until that light too went out, then moved swiftly across the open ground to the east side of the house. There, Marigold whispered, pointing to a window on the ground floor. That's Silas's study. Flint tested the window, finding, as Marigold had said, that it didn't latch properly. He slid it open carefully, the faint squeak of the frame sounding unnaturally loud in the quiet night. Ladies first, he said with a small smile, offering her his cupped hands as a step up. The familiar smell of the study tobacco, leather, and Silas's bay rum cologne nearly made Marigold gag as she climbed through the window. Flint followed silently, closing the window most of the way behind them. Where would he keep these ledgers? He whispered. Marigold moved confidently to a large bookcase that covered one wall. Behind here, there's a hidden compartment. She ran her fingers along the edge of the bookcase until she found the concealed lever. A section of the shelving swung outward, revealing a small safe built into the wall. Do you know the combination? Flint asked, looking impressed. Marigold nodded. His birthday. Silas was never particularly creative. She spun the dial carefully, the click of the tumblers falling into place unnervingly loud in the silent room. When the safe door swung open, she reached inside and withdrew 2 leather-bound ledgers. These are what we need. The red one is his illegal cattle transactions. The black one is his weapons dealing. Flint took the books, quickly leafing through them in the dim light from their single lantern. This is damning stuff, he muttered. Names, dates, amounts. He really did keep meticulous records. Silas always said a businessman needs to track every penny, Marigold said with bitter irony. He just didn't expect anyone else to see these particular books. As Flint continued examining the ledgers, Marigold's attention was drawn to something else in the safe, a small wooden box she'd never seen before. Curious, she lifted it out and opened the lid. Inside was a stack of letters tied with string, and beneath them, legal documents. She skimmed the top document, her blood running cold as she realized what she was holding. Flint, she whispered urgently, look at this. He moved to her side, holding the lantern closer. What is it? Deed transfers, for 3 small ranches bordering Silas's property. Her finger traced the signatures. These men didn't sell willingly. Silas told me they were all killed in accidents or by Apache raids. Flint's expression darkened as he examined the papers. These signatures look forced. And look at the witnesses, the same 2 names on all of them, Troy Simmons and Jeb Harris, both Parker's men. And these letters, Marigold continued, untying the string, they're from someone named Martinez in Santa Fe. He's talking about removing obstacles and making examples. She looked up at Flint, her eyes wide. These are orders for killings. A floorboard creaked in the hallway, freezing them both in place. Flint quickly extinguished the lantern, plunging them into darkness. The study door opened, and light from an oil lamp spilled into the room. In the doorway stood Mrs. Downey, the housekeeper, her gray hair in a nightcap, her eyes widening in shock as she recognized Marigold. "Mrs. Parker," she gasped. "What are you—" "Please, Mrs. Downey," Marigold said quickly, stepping forward. "Don't raise the alarm." The older woman hesitated, her gaze moving between Marigold, Flint, and the open safe. Understanding dawned in her eyes. "You're taking evidence against him, aren't you?" she asked quietly. Marigold nodded. "He needs to be stopped, Mrs. Downey. You know what he's capable of." The housekeeper's hand went unconsciously to her cheek, where Marigold knew Silas had struck her more than once when displeased with her work. "I should call for help," Mrs. Downey said, but her voice lacked conviction. "You could," Flint said gently. "But would that be justice? For yourself? For Marigold? For all the others he's hurt?" Mrs. Downey's shoulders sagged. "What can I do to help? Relief flooded through Marigold. "Is anyone else awake in the house?" "No, just me. I heard a noise and thought it might be mice in the pantry again." She glanced at the ledgers in Flint's hands. "You'll need more than those. In his bedroom, there's a strong box under the floorboards beneath his bed. It has cash and letters from officials he's bribed." "You know a lot about his secrets," Flint observed. Mrs. Downey's smile was bitter. "When you're a servant, you become invisible. People say and do things as if you're not there. I've seen more than he realizes." With the housekeeper's help, they gathered additional evidence from throughout the house: the strongbox from under Silas's bed, correspondence from his desk drawer, even a small book where he'd recorded debts owed to him by various officials. "You should come with us," Marigold urged Mrs. Downey as they prepared to leave. "When he finds out you helped us," the older woman shook her head. "I'm too old to start over. Besides, I can be more help to you here. I can delay raising the alarm, maybe even misdirect them about which way you went." "That's very brave," Flint said. "It's what's right," Mrs. Downey replied simply. "Now go before someone else wakes up." They slipped out the same window they'd entered, the saddlebags now heavy with evidence. As they made their way back to where they'd left the horses, Marigold felt a strange mix of emotions: fear that they might still be caught, grief for the years she'd lost in that house, but most of all, hope that justice might finally be possible. They rode hard through the night, taking a different route back to avoid potential pursuers. Dawn was breaking when they finally reached the Circle M, exhausted but triumphant. Eleanor was waiting on the porch, rifle across her knees. She jumped to her feet as they rode in. "Thank God! I was starting to worry." "We got it," Flint called as they dismounted. "Everything we need to bring Parker down." Inside, they spread the evidence across the kitchen table: ledgers, letters, deeds, and more. Eleanor examined it with growing amazement. "This is enough to hang him 10 times over," she declared. "But who do we take it to? Like you said, the local law is in his pocket." "Not the federal marshals," Flint said. "I know a man, Wyatt Marshall. He works out of Denver, incorruptible and thorough. If we can get this evidence to him, he'll do the rest." "Denver's a 4-day ride," Eleanor pointed out. "I'll leave today," Flint decided. "The sooner we get this to Marshall, the better." "I'm coming with you," Marigold said firmly. "This is my fight." Flint looked like he wanted to argue, but then nodded. "All right, but we travel fast and light." They spent the morning organizing the evidence, securing it in oilskin packages to protect it from the elements. By noon, they were ready to depart. "Be careful," Eleanor said as she embraced Marigold. "Parker's men will be looking everywhere once they realize what you've taken." "We'll be careful," Marigold promised, "and we'll return as soon as we can." The journey to Denver was tense. They kept to less traveled routes, avoiding towns and settlements where news of their theft might have spread. Each night, they made cold camps away from trails, taking turns keeping watch. On the third evening, as they sat by their small fire in a sheltered ravine, Flint finally asked the question that had been on his mind. "What will you do after, when this is all over?" Marigold poked at the fire with a stick, watching the sparks rise into the darkening sky. "I hadn't thought that far ahead," she admitted. "For so long, all I could think about was escaping. Then it was about surviving. Now it's about justice." "And after justice?" Flint pressed gently. She looked at him across the flames, this man who had risked everything to help her, who had touched her brand and declared that she belonged only to herself. "I'd like to start fresh," she said. "Somewhere I can be just Marigold, not Silas Parker's wife or property. Somewhere I can discover who I really am when I'm free to choose." Flint nodded, understanding in his eyes. "The Circle M would welcome you for as long as you want to stay." "Because of Eleanor's kindness?" "Because of that," he agreed, and because he hesitated, then continued more softly. "Because I'd like you to stay. If you wanted to." The warmth that spread through her chest had nothing to do with the fire. "I might want to," she said, a small smile curving her lips. They reached Denver late on the 4th day, the city's buildings a stark contrast to the wilderness they'd been traveling through. Marshal Wyatt Marshall's office was in a solid brick building near the courthouse. The marshal himself was a surprise younger than Marigold had expected, perhaps in his late 30s, with intelligent eyes and a decisive manner. He listened to their story without interruption, examining each piece of evidence with methodical care. "This is quite a case you've brought me," he said when they'd finished. "Rustling, fraud, weapons dealing, bribery, even murder for hire. If even half of this checks out, Silas Parker won't see daylight again." "It will check out," Marigold assured him. "Every piece of it." "I believe you, Mrs. Parker, but the law requires verification." He gathered the materials carefully. "I'll need to keep all of this, and I'll need both of you to give formal statements. Then, we can discuss next steps." For the next 2 days, they worked with Marshall and his deputies, going through every document, explaining connections and context. Marigold's knowledge of Silas's business proved invaluable, filling gaps that the written evidence alone couldn't cover. On the evening of the second day, Marshall called them into his office, his expression grave. "I've sent telegrams to my colleagues in New Mexico Territory and received replies. The evidence is holding up. There are corroborating witnesses coming forward now that they know Parker might finally face justice." He leaned back in his chair. "I'm preparing to ride to Tascosa with a contingent of deputies to arrest him." "When?" Flint asked. "We leave tomorrow. It's a 5-day journey if we push hard." Marshall turned to Marigold. "Mrs. Parker, I should warn you that when we arrest your husband, he will likely make counter-accusations against you. He could claim you stole from him, abandoned your marriage vows, even that you conspired to frame him." "Let him," Marigold said, lifting her chin. "I have the truth on my side. And this." She turned slightly, indicating her shoulder where the brand, now healing but still clearly visible, marked her skin. Marshall's expression darkened. "That will speak volumes in court." When they left the marshal's office, Flint was unusually quiet as they walked back to the small hotel where they were staying. "What's wrong?" Marigold asked. He stopped in the middle of the sidewalk, turning to face her. "I've been thinking about what Marshall said, about Silas making accusations against you." "I'm not afraid of that," she said. "I know. You're the bravest person I've ever met." His blue eyes were intense in the gathering dusk. "But legally, you're still his wife. That gives him certain rights in the eyes of the law, even with all the evidence against him." Understanding dawned. "You think I need a divorce?" "I think you need protection," Flint corrected. "Legal separation at minimum, to protect yourself from any claims he might make against you." Marigold nodded slowly. "You're right. I'll speak to Marshal Marshall about it tomorrow. Perhaps he can recommend a lawyer." They continued walking, the streets growing quieter as they moved away from the busier part of town. When they reached the hotel, Flint paused before they went inside. "Marigold," he said hesitantly, "there's something else I've been meaning to ask you." Her heart quickened at his tone. "Yes?" "When this is all over, when you're truly free, would you consider," he took a deep breath, "would you consider allowing me to court you properly? I know it's too soon and you've been through so much, but She stopped his words by placing her fingers gently against his lips. "It's not too soon," she said softly. "You've shown me what a good man truly is, Flint O'Brien. And yes, when I'm free, I would very much like for you to court me." His smile was like sunrise breaking across the mountains. The next morning, they met with a lawyer recommended by Marshal Marshall. Mr. Goodwin, a serious man with spectacles and a surprisingly kind manner, listened to Marigold's story with growing indignation. "The branding alone constitutes extreme cruelty," he declared. "Add to that the other abuses you've suffered and his criminal activities. We have more than sufficient grounds for divorce." "How long will it take?" Marigold asked. "Normally, divorce proceedings can be lengthy. But given the circumstances, especially with federal charges pending against your husband, we may be able to expedite matters." He shuffled through some papers on his desk. "I'll file the paperwork today and request an emergency hearing based on the imminent arrest and the danger to your person." 2 tense days passed while they waited for news. Marshall and his deputies had departed for Tascosa, carrying with them warrants for Silas Parker's arrest on multiple federal charges. On the morning of the third day, Mr. Goodwin appeared at their hotel, his expression triumphant. "The judge has granted an emergency hearing for this afternoon. Given the unusual circumstances in the federal case against your husband, he's willing to consider immediate action." The courtroom was small and austere, with just the judge, court clerk, Mr. Goodwin, Marigold, and Flint present. Judge Harmon, an older man with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor, reviewed the petition carefully. "Mrs. Parker," he said finally, "these are serious allegations. Are you prepared to testify to their truth under oath?" "I am, Your Honor," Marigold replied steadily. "And the physical evidence mentioned the brand you are willing to have this documented for the court record?" She swallowed hard, but nodded. "Yes, Your Honor." The judge's examination was thorough but respectful. When he asked to see the brand, a female court clerk was called to accompany Marigold to a private room, where the mark was examined and documented with clinical precision. When they returned to the courtroom, the judge's face had hardened. "I have been on the bench for 23 years, he said gravely, "and I have seldom seen such a clear case of cruelty and degradation. Mrs. Parker, no human being deserves such treatment, regardless of marital status." He picked up his pen and signed the decree with a flourish. "I hereby grant your petition for divorce on grounds of extreme cruelty. Further, I am issuing a protective order forbidding Silas Parker from approaching or contacting you in any way." Relief washed over Marigold like a cool wave. "Thank you, Your Honor." Outside the courthouse, standing in the bright Colorado sunshine, Marigold felt as though a great weight had been lifted from her shoulders. She was no longer Marigold Parker, property of Silas. She was just Marigold, free to decide her own future. "How does it feel?" Flint asked, watching her face. "Like being born again," she said honestly. "Scary and wonderful all at once." He offered her his arm. "What would you like to do first as a free woman?" She thought for a moment, then smiled. "I'd like to buy a new dress, one that I choose in a color I like. And then I'd like to have dinner with you, Mr. O'Brien, as the beginning of our courtship." His answering smile was radiant. "It would be my honor, Miss Marigold." They were enjoying dessert in a small restaurant near the hotel when a commotion outside drew their attention. A rider was galloping down the street, headed for the telegraph office. "Something's happened," Flint said, instantly alert. They quickly paid their bill and made their way to the telegraph office, where a small crowd was gathering. The rider was speaking rapidly to the telegraph operator. "What's going on?" Flint asked a bystander. "Marshall's deputy just rode in from the south," the man replied. "Something about a shootout in Tascosa. Federal marshals against some cattle barons' men." Marigold's heart raced. "Silas," she whispered. They pushed through to the front where the deputy, dusty and exhausted, was still giving his report. "Deputy," Flint called, "we're with Marshall on the Parker case. What happened?" The man turned, recognizing them from the days they'd spent at the marshal's office. "Parker resisted arrest," he said grimly. "Had his men open fire when we rode up to the ranch. Marshall took a bullet in the shoulder, but we managed to capture Parker." "He's alive?" Marigold asked. "Very much so, madam, and cursing your name with every breath." The deputy gave her a sympathetic look. "We've got him locked up in Tascosa for now, but we'll be transferring him to Denver for trial as soon as the marshal's fit to travel." "And the evidence?" Flint pressed. "Safe. Parker tried to claim you stole personal property, but the marshal had all the documentation ready. He's facing multiple federal charges. No way he's walking away from this." Relief and vindication flooded through Marigold. It was really happening. Silas would face justice for his crimes. "Thank you, Deputy," she said sincerely. As they walked back to the hotel, Flint took her hand in his. "It's almost over," he said. "Just the trial left, and then you'll truly be free of him." "I already am," Marigold replied, squeezing his hand. "The divorce is final, and Silas is behind bars. Whatever happens at the trial, he can't hurt me anymore. The next few weeks passed in a blur of legal preparations. Marshall returned to Denver with his prisoner, his arm in a sling, but his determination undiminished. Silas Parker was held in the federal jail, denied bail due to the severity of the charges and the risk of flight. Marigold was called to give testimony before a grand jury, an experience that was both terrifying and liberating. Speaking the truth about what she'd endured, about what she'd witnessed, lifted a burden she'd carried for too long. Through it all, Flint remained steadfastly by her side, attending every hearing, waiting outside when she gave private testimony, offering quiet support when the strain became too much. Their courtship progressed with an old-fashioned propriety that Marigold found healing after the possessiveness of her marriage to Silas. Flint was patient and respectful, never pushing for more than she was ready to give, finding small ways to show his affection. Wildflowers left at her hotel door, a book of poetry he thought she might enjoy, long walks where they talked about everything and nothing. When the grand jury returned indictments on all charges, Marigold felt the last piece of her old life falling away. Silas would stand trial for fraud, weapons dealing, conspiracy, and 2 counts of murder for hire. The evidence was overwhelming, with additional witnesses coming forward now that his power was broken. "You won't need to testify at the criminal trial," Mr. Goodwin informed her. "The federal prosecutor believes they have more than enough evidence without putting you through that ordeal." The day the trial began, Marigold and Flint stood on the steps of the courthouse, watching as Silas was led in, shackled and under heavy guard. He caught sight of her and his face contorted with rage. "You'll pay for this," he shouted. "No one leaves Silas Parker. No one!" Flint stepped slightly in front of her, protective without being possessive. "He can't hurt you anymore," he reminded her quietly. "I know," she said, watching as her former husband was led inside. "He never really could. He could hurt my body, but not my spirit. Not what makes me who I am." That evening, as they sat in the hotel restaurant discussing the day's events, Flint reached across the table to take her hand. "I've been thinking," he said, his blue eyes serious, "about the future." "What about it?" she asked. "Eleanor sent a letter. She wants me to take over as full manager of the Circle M. Says she's getting too old for the day-to-day running of the place." He paused. "It would mean staying in Colorado, making a real home there." Marigold felt a flutter of anticipation. "That sounds like a wonderful opportunity." "It would be," he agreed, "especially if—" He hesitated, then reached into his pocket and withdrew a small box. "Especially if you were there with me, as my wife." He opened the box to reveal a simple gold band set with a small, perfect sapphire. "I know it hasn't been that long, and if you need more time, I understand completely. But I love you, Marigold. I want to build a life with you, a life where you are always free, always your own person, just sharing your journey with me if you choose to." Tears welled in her eyes, but they were tears of joy, not sorrow. "Yes," she whispered, "yes, I choose that." The trial of Silas Parker lasted 2 weeks, dominating the headlines of Denver's newspapers. The evidence was damning, the testimony compelling. When the jury returned their verdict guilty on all counts, Marigold was in the courtroom, Flint beside her, her engagement ring catching the light. Silas's face as the verdict was read was a study in disbelief and rage. He had never imagined that his actions would have consequences, that his power could be broken, that the woman he had branded as property could be the architect of his downfall. The judge sentenced him to 30 years in federal prison, to be served at the penitentiary in Leavenworth, Kansas, far from his former domain and the power he had wielded there. As he was led away, Silas looked directly at Marigold, his eyes burning with hatred. But she met his gaze steadily, without fear. He had no power over her anymore. Outside the courthouse, reporters clamored for a statement. Marigold hesitated, then stepped forward. "Justice has been served today, not just for me, but for all those Silas Parker hurt during his years of unchecked power," she said clearly. "I hope this case sends a message that no human being can be owned, that no marriage vow gives one person the right to abuse another, and that no amount of money or influence can place someone above the law. They were married 2 weeks later in a simple ceremony at the Circle M Ranch, with Eleanor beaming proudly as she hosted the modest celebration. The ranch hands, who had come to respect both Flint for his fair leadership and Marigold for her courage, decorated the barn with wildflowers and lanterns. Marigold wore a dress of deep blue silk, the first fine gown she had ever chosen for herself, with her shortened hair curling softly around her face. As she walked toward Flint, who waited for her beneath an arch of woven branches, she felt a profound sense of rightness, of coming home. The minister, an elderly man with kind eyes, spoke of partnership and respect, of love freely given and received. When it came time for the vows, Flint had surprised her with words he had written himself. "Marigold," he said, his voice steady and sure, "I take you as my wife, not to possess but to cherish. I promise to stand beside you, not in front of you or behind you. I vow to support your dreams, respect your thoughts, and honor your independence. I pledge my love, my loyalty, and my life to our partnership for as long as we both shall live." Tears blurred her vision as she responded with her own vows, promising to love him freely, to build a life together based on mutual respect and shared joy. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Flint's kiss was gentle and reverent, a promise of all that was to come. Later, as they danced beneath the stars to the music of a fiddle and guitar, Flint held her close, careful of the still healing brand on her shoulder. "Mrs. O'Brien," he murmured, testing the name. "How does it feel?" "Wonderful," she replied honestly, "because I chose it freely." His hand moved to her shoulder, gently touching the spot where beneath her dress the brand was gradually fading to a scar. "This mark doesn't define you," he said softly. "It never did." "I know," she said, leaning into his embrace. "I belong only to myself, but I choose to share my life with you." Over the years that followed, the Circle M prospered under their joint stewardship. When Eleanor finally decided to retire completely, she signed the deed over to both of them, insisting they had earned it through their hard work and dedication. "Besides," she said with a wink, "you'll need the space for those children I expect you to give me to spoil." Their first child, a son they named Henry after Eleanor's late husband, arrived a year after their wedding, a sturdy boy with Flint's blue eyes and Marigold's determined spirit. A daughter, Eleanor, followed 2 years later, and then another son, James. The brand on Marigold's shoulder faded to a silvery scar, a reminder not of ownership but of survival. Sometimes, when she caught a glimpse of it in the mirror, she would touch it lightly, remembering the journey that had brought her from captivity to freedom, from fear to love. On their 5th wedding anniversary, Flint surprised her with a special gift, the deed to a small plot of land adjoining the Circle M. "What's this for?" she asked, puzzled. "For your school," he explained. "You've talked about wanting to teach, about creating a place where girls especially could learn independence and self-reliance. I thought this could be the place." Tears filled her eyes as she embraced him. "How did I get so lucky?" "It wasn't luck," he said, holding her close. "It was courage, yours, to escape and start over. Mine, to believe in love again after losing my sister. We made this life together, one choice at a time." The Marigold School for Girls opened the following year, starting with just 7 students, but growing steadily. Marigold taught reading, writing, and arithmetic, but also self-defense, horseback riding, and how to manage money, all the skills a woman would need to be truly independent in a world that often sought to limit her. News of Silas Parker reached them occasionally, that he had tried and failed to win appeals, that his health was failing in prison, that former associates had abandoned him. Marigold acknowledged these reports with calm detachment, neither gloating over nor lamenting his fate. He was part of her past, not her future. On their 10th anniversary, they held a grand celebration at the ranch, inviting friends and neighbors from miles around. The ranch had prospered, expanding its operations while maintaining the fair practices that had become the O'Briens' hallmark. As twilight fell and lanterns were lit, Flint led Marigold away from the festivities to the quiet of their garden, a lush oasis she had cultivated over the years, filled with wildflowers and herbs. "Happy anniversary, my love," he said, presenting her with a small velvet box. Inside was a pendant, a delicate gold circle surrounding a perfect diamond. "It's beautiful," she breathed. "I chose the circle to represent freedom," Flint explained as he fastened it around her neck. "No beginning, no end, no angles to trap you. And the diamond," his fingers brushed her shoulder where the brand had been, "to reclaim that shape as something beautiful and valuable, like you." Marigold touched the pendant, deeply moved by the thought behind it. "I never dreamed I could be this happy," she admitted. "That night I fled Tascosa. I had no plan beyond escape. I never imagined finding you, building this life." "Sometimes the best journeys are the ones we don't plan," Flint replied, drawing her into his arms. "We just have to be brave enough to take the first step." As they stood together in the garden they had planted, surrounded by the life they had built, Marigold reflected on the long road from that terrible day when Silas had branded her as property. The mark on her skin had faded, but the truth Flint had spoken when he first saw it remained as powerful as ever. She belonged only to herself, and that self had chosen love, chosen family, chosen a life of meaning and purpose, not as someone's possession, but as a woman standing tall in her own right, sharing her journey with a man who walked beside her, never ahead or behind. In the distance, their children laughed as they played with friends, the sounds of music and celebration drifted on the evening breeze, and the future stretched before them, open, unwritten, full of possibility. Marigold smiled, leaning into her husband's embrace. This was freedom. This was love. This was the life she had claimed for herself, one brave choice at a time.